before we even start and I start explaining what it is, we're going to get you to start creating your React application, because nowadays it takes a little while because of the way they're doing it. And we'll talk about that later. So if you don't have Node already downloaded, you can just Google Node.js and just download it from their website. And I'll let you start there and listen in while your download is working. And then we can I'll pause somewhere halfway through and we can create a React app. And then that way you guys can follow along as we work through this. All right. So in case you haven't already guessed, I'm talking about React today. React is a basic, simple JavaScript framework that we're going to use to create websites. And we'll talk more about how it works, what it does, and then I'll probably make a fool of myself by writing code that doesn't work in front of you. But that's okay. That's what I do for a living. All right, so let's start with an agenda of kind of what we're going to go over. I'm going to start with some boring history stuff. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about kind of how early content on the web works, what it looked like, all that kind of stuff. Then we'll get into what React is, how it works, and kind of some of the magic and the ways they want you to do things. And if you guys have more questions and you want to wait till the end, I'll stay a little bit afterward too, and you guys can ask all your questions then if you don't want to interrupt. All right, so let's talk about some history. So the web, or the internet as you know it, right, is actually not that old. It happened in 1990 when CERN kind of announced, hey, we've come up with this thing, we're going to call it the World Wide Web. And you can essentially, it had base concepts of, there's an IP address and you can connect to other people and blah, blah, like very basic, what you guys would consider the most basic of concepts, right? It wasn't until 1993 when somebody came up with HTML. Technically, it existed before that inside of a company. And what happened was that company published their standard, which eventually became named HTML. Basically, HTML is just an extension of XML that defines a very specific syntax for the markup and allows you to make, very basic websites. So if you guys have ever played around with HTML, we're going to get into something that looks a little bit like HTML today. So get ready for that. JavaScript came about in 1995, and then CSS came about in 1996. So in between 95 and 96, there were a lot of people styling with JavaScript and some really random, I'm sure not fun ways. So I'm going to pause here and I'm going to show you what the web looked like in 1996 versus what it looks like today. And I've picked probably a website that everybody's familiar with. It is Amazon.com. So here's Amazon in 1996 versus today. There wasn't a lot going on in 1996. We got a gray background with a box. That's pretty cool. So there's a lot of styling with tables, a lot of blocky components. Everything is written in HTML, and there's a lot of JavaScript happening. Or at this point, we're starting to get into server-side rendering, which we won't cover in this presentation. But yeah, the web has come a long way. So we're going to speed things up past 1996. I skipped a whole bunch of time and went all the way to 2011. Some of you have probably heard of this framework called Bootstrap. Bootstrap's essentially a CSS framework that you can use to make things pretty and style them. And for the most part is not similar to React, but we'll talk about kind of what they're aiming at and what they're trying to get at. They both have a similar kind of goal-ish. And then we've got React in 2013. And React aims to do what a lot of frameworks in JavaScript didn't do before it. And a lot of CSS frameworks really can't do. So what sets React apart from other JavaScript frameworks? Ooh, that's a great question. So React and other JavaScript frameworks, they all kind of tackle, I would say, like different base goals. Each one of them has like a different idea behind it. React's huge premise is that it's trying to componentize your code to make it highly reusable. So if you guys have ever taken like an object-oriented programming class, yet you talk about low coupling and high cohesion and reuse of code as objects and all that kind of different principles, right? React is kind of aiming to do that with visual components. And so the frameworks that you see that are built around React kind of aim at aligning with that purpose. And so you guys may have heard React commonly paired with Redux. Redux is another JavaScript framework, and we won't talk about it, but you use it for like state management and stuff like that. So there's a lot of things that React tries to tackle, but the first thing that it attempted at was componentizing the web and making it highly reusable. Because I don't know how many of you have ever written a full website in HTML. It's the way I started writing websites. It gets really messy after about page 3 or 4, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm like thousands of lines of HTML deep, and I've made like 4 boxes, and they look good, but it's only 4 boxes. So React aims at making that a lot easier, and we'll kind of show some examples of that. All right, so let's get into what is React. So we've covered it's a JavaScript web framework, and somebody already got out of me that it's component-based architecture, right? That's what it's aiming for. The last piece of this is JSX. So unique to or highly used within the React framework, they've got what they call JSX. It's a syntax extension to JavaScript. So in HTML, you're used to writing like a div, and then there's some content in the div. And in React, you might do something very similar. But it turns out that that's not actually HTML. So let's talk about that. Here's a little example slide. So we've got a little my button example, and we've set the color to blue, and we've given it a little shadow there of 2 units of some kind, probably defaults to pixels, and it says click me, right? Okay, this is JSX. This is not HTML. So in React, what happens is when React transpiles, technically compiles is the wrong word, but transpiles down into JavaScript, what happens is we get this. So this is what's actually happening behind the scenes. So it takes this nice, pretty like element that you've created here, and it spits out some code that looks a lot like this. And so you can see as you go down, like if you had a button inside your button, and then a div inside that, and then a list inside that, and then you just get deeper and deeper into the chaining. So you can actually, in a React framework, write code like this. You can actually say react.create element and work your way through to create individual React components, is what they're called. These little tags end up being what we call a component. Or we can write it all in JSX. And so today we're going to write everything using JSX. It's a lot easier to understand. And a lot of you guys will probably align with that a little bit better if you've done any HTML or similar web development in the past. The one thing to note is that it's just not actually HTML. All right, so we're going to get rid of this awful PowerPoint, and we're going to skip straight on over to writing some code. So let's just talk about HelloWorld here. So I'm going to pop open a terminal. You guys can use, if you're on Windows, PowerShell is probably your best bet there. If you're on a Mac, you have a terminal. If you want to get to it very quickly, you hit Command space, and you just type terminal, and we'll say terminal.app, and you can just click that, and you'll get here pretty quickly. So I've created our React app ahead of time. I'm going to show you how to do it. That way you know. I created it ahead of time because depending on your internet speed, this can actually take quite a lot longer than you think it does. because it's grabbing like about a bajillion things, and React has moved from create React app and downloading that and getting all the dependencies and then just quickly creating an app to dynamically downloading create React app on the fly. So the way you create a React app nowadays, in the newest of senses, is you type npx and then you type the argument create React app. And then the last thing that you're going to type is the name of the directory in which you want to place this app. Usually that would be the name of your application. So in this case, we'll just say like test app, right? Because I've created our real app, which I've called Hello React. So if I were to put Hello React, it would tell me this already exists. So I'm going to put test app. If you guys want to put Hello React, go for it. So npx create React app directory name. So when I hit enter, you're going to see a bunch of things fly across the screen. Basically what it's doing is it's downloading dependencies for create React app. Then it's going to download create React app. Then it's going to actually create your application. And then it's going to do a whole bunch of setup to make sure that what it created actually functions. So it does a lot of work. I'm just going to leave this running. And for now, while you guys have this running on your screen, if you're creating it, I'm just going to talk about the code side of things, and we won't edit anything. And then in a couple of minutes, I'll start editing. And by then, hopefully, everybody's got their app working. So you guys can use whatever editor you'd like, Notepad++, VS Code. I'm a little bougie, so I'm going to use WebStorm. It's going to provide me a lot of tips and tricks while I teach. So I think WebStorm has like a community trial. Yeah, you guys can use whatever editor you prefer. Like whatever your favorite editor is, go for it. If you really like VI, you can use that too. I have been teaching and had people ask me if they can use VI. I am all for it. All right, so when you get to your editor, you can just open the directory or open the project. So I'm going to open Hello React. Of course, it opens on the wrong screen. Come down here. Okay. So we've got our Hello React directory over on the right. And if we open it, we've got some files. And then if we open the source directory, we've got even more files. And then we've got this README. This tells us all about getting started with Create React App. This tells you the available commands you have and what they all do. The main one that we're going to talk about today is just npm start, and I'll leave the rest of these for later because I want to get to actually getting you guys to have something up and working. So I have this nice convenient, this is why I use WebStorm instead of other things. I have this nice convenient feature where I can put a terminal at the bottom of my screen for you guys, and then that way everything's on one screen for you. So if by default, all we did is come in here and we just put npm start and we hit enter, right? All it's going to do is start up our app, and it starts this server called Webpack, right? And I have this over on a different screen. So it'll say compiled successfully. And it'll say you can now view Hello React in the browser. And these are your two links. So I can take this one. For you guys, it's going to copy this link and automatically open your default browser of choice and throw it in there for you. So I'm going to come over here and just go to localhost 3000. All right, ta-da! This is literally all we have by default. All right, can we code React in PowerShell? So PowerShell, at least that I know of, doesn't have an inbuilt editor. If you need to get a really quick editor, VS Code is a pretty good choice. It's super free and it's super lightweight. So you should be able to like download and install it pretty quickly. And then VS Code has this feature where you can like open a folder, and then you can just open the folder that got created with your Create React app. All right. So we've got this basic web page here. This is a demo, and this is not super fancy. It's a GIF. So actually now it might be super fancy. They may have changed it to CSS3 rotating graphics. So basically, we've got this really basic web page. This is all that comes with it. It says edit source app.js and save to reload. So what does this mean? So React has this really cool feature in development where it does what we call hot loading. So once we start our app for the first time, unless we make configuration changes to the Webpack server or something different, we're never going to have to reload our web server. We're never going to have to shut it down and bring it back up and shut it down and bring it back up. Like if you guys have played with like a Java program or like a C or C++ program, you're probably used to like cleaning your build and then building and then running it and then doing that over and over and over and over again. When you work in interpreted language like JavaScript or Python or something else, a lot of them have really cool features where you can just edit it live and it will just rerun your program on the fly. And so that's what React is going to do for us. So like you see where it says edit source app.js and save to reload. I can come over to my editor and I'll find in the source folder, there's a file called app.js. And I can come in here and it says edit source app.js to save and reload. I can just take this and say something like, haha, I have edited this file. And when I save it, you'll notice down below, you may have noticed, it flashed my terminal really quick and it'll say compiled successfully. That's how fast it'll build. And if I pop back over to the web page, it has already loaded my changes in. So if you have a bigger monitor than I do, or you have two monitors side by side, right? A really easy, quick, convenient way to develop in React is to put your web browser on one side and your code on the other side, and just save and watch the changes load on your browser. If your changes don't load, or like something seems off, like it just won't load and you've refreshed the page and it still doesn't load, usually you've got a problem with your syntax. So like if you make a syntactical error or like the program fails to compile, you should see it in your console. But if you're like me, you just assume that you did it right and you just go straight to the web browser, right? And then it doesn't load. So check your console first. If you don't see the error there, it might be that, once we get into like a little more dynamic page content, if you hit inspect element, let's put this on the right-hand side of the screen. And you go to console. Right now it's blank, but if you made an error, the error would show up here. So like, let's see if I can get an error to show up. Like if I did something like call a function that doesn't exist. So it'll compile successfully, but now I get this. Console.notlog is not a function. And it's going to give me this big giant error right here. And then you can see in my console, there's errors here. So I'm going to pop open the console because I'll use it to print things out just to show you guys what's going on throughout. But for now, we'll just stick with this. If you guys haven't edited this, don't worry, we're about to get rid of it. All right, cool. So hopefully everybody has a React app created and you've got some editor open with the folder content on your screen. So I'm going to start playing around with the code a little bit now. So let's talk about JSX and how this page is constructed a little bit. So we talked about the fact that all these tags are not HTML. So if you guys have ever written HTML, this looks a heck of a lot like HTML, especially in their example app where they just happen to use a bunch of default HTML tags. So really what's going on here, and this is where WebStorm is going to help me out. This div is not actually HTML. And I can prove it because in this, I can essentially jump to the location of a file or library in my editor. And so here you go. This is what the div actually is. Div is this. And so it's a bunch of JavaScript that's like, oh, hey, this is what actually makes a div in React. At the end of the day, on the web, this does become a div. But because we're in JavaScript, JavaScript has to take this and turn it into an HTML element. And to do that, we're using JSX. So just to prove to you guys, this really isn't HTML. I promise it's not. All right, let's talk about a couple of other things. So the layout of this file is important. So it starts with function app, right? So you guys are pretty used to the concept of a function. If you've never coded in JavaScript, I assume you've coded in probably one or more other languages. So a function basically just has a name, it takes some inputs, and it returns something at the end should you choose to return something, right? Assuming it's not void or something like that. So the first thing to note is if you never coded in JavaScript, JavaScript is a typeless language. So when we say things like int or char, or JavaScript doesn't care about that. So you'll notice that none of those exist. So when I choose to return something, if there's a return statement, it's returning something. If there's no return statement, the function is essentially what you would think of as a void function. All right, here's the name of my function. It's named app, and it's capitalized because app is a component. So I can make more components, and components are essentially React's way of making the web easier to construct. So like, let's say when I'm thinking about this page, right? If I wanted like a bunch of these things to say learn React, like if I wanted a statement and then I just wanted to say learn React, and I want to do that like over and over and over and over again, right? A component would be a really good way to do that, because usually in HTML, you end up with something like this or some other really weird JavaScript where they're doing this thing, right? And whoops, while that works, hey, look, I've got a bunch of them, right? In React, you can simply make what we call a component. And so a component is a really easy way to componentize that section and do something new with it. So here, we'll make a component really quick. So components are essentially just functions that have return values that return some sort of JSX at the end of the day. So we can make the learn React component, right? And this learn React component, let's say we wanted to take some text, right? And right now we're doing all of this like this. If you guys are used to functional JavaScript, we'll get there, I promise. So I'm going to take this little section that we want to turn into a component, and I'm just going to put it up here like this. Okay, so this is your first lesson in React. React always needs what we call a base element. So notice how these two elements are essentially siblings. They live right next to each other. In React, you always need a base element. So I need something to surround these guys. And because I'm lazy, I'm just going to throw a div in here. I should show you here. You know what? We'll talk about it. In React, there's this really cool concept to surround something with nothing. So if you actually want sibling elements as a component, but you don't want to surround them with anything, use what we call the empty element. And if you just put that, that does work. So I'll throw that in there. There's many things that we can talk about with that. All right, so we've got empty element, and then here we've got, haha, I've added this file, and then we've got an A tag. So now, fun enough, what we can do is we can come down here below where we originally had this thing, and we can just put learn React. But yeah, just like that. And now our page looks exactly the same. And to prove to you that this is actually rendering what you think it is, we can put like 3 learn Reacts, and now there's 3 of them. So now we've just componentized the web, right? Well, you'll notice I've taken this interesting text string here, and really it should be props. We'll talk about this later, but really we should name this props. And essentially what happens here is we're going to pass a property to this learn React. We're going to say like text equals, and then we can put like some sort of string here, and we can say like hello, and then we can just copy this a couple of times. Please learn React. All right, so now we've got a little component in here, and we're passing some text. Well, you'll notice that nothing has changed, right? Because we've got to tell it how we're going to use this. So up here in my function, remember that we have more than just a return statement. We can do more than that. So in here, I'm going to say, I'm going to make a constant variable and I'm going to call it text, right? And I'm going to set this equal to props.text, right? All right, so now what we've got, oh, my spacing is all whack. That's okay. Forgive the spacing. So we've got this variable named text now, and we've set it equal to props.text. So anything you pass to one of these JSX tags comes in as a property. So let's show you guys what we mean by that. So if I just print out props, essentially what it is, whoops, if I remember how to print while I'm talking. So essentially what this is, it's an object with a bunch of keys and values, right? And one of those keys is going to be the text word. So here you go. So you can see that it prints 3 times because we've got 3 of them, and they're each an object and they each have 1 key and 1 value. So if I passed more than one of those little tags and the actual little JSX there, it would give me more keys and values. So now I can pull it out by just saying props dot whatever key I want to have. So now I can actually render using code. So this is the next important thing about React. So in React, we can render using our actual code. If we just throw some of these curly braces in here like this, some mustaches, and we just put whatever code we want. So like if I wanted to print something, I could console.log in here, right? If I wanted to print out a variable in JavaScript, all I have to do is write the variable's name. So now when I write text in here, your website's going to change. Bleh. So now it says, hello, please learn React. Ta-da! So we can easily render using code by just putting some curly braces and throwing some text in here like this. All right, so here's this is our basic like, hello world, how do we use React? This is JSX, that kind of a thing. So next, what we're gonna do is we're gonna make about the most simple to-do list in the universe. So we're gonna make a to-do list, and then that will be the app that we create, and then you guys can take that and hopefully move on in your React learning knowledge. So after we finish our to-do list, then we'll move to questions if you guys have any. Any questions before I start the to-do list? Is anybody just dying for a question? No.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything in chat right now.
All right, cool. We can do the to-do list. All right, so let's do it. So we're going to actually start out by clearing this example app off the screen. We're going to get a nice white blank screen here, and we're going to make all of it in our one little component here because I want to talk about a few things. So React and JavaScript are they're not meant to be, right? But the paradigm is shifting toward functional programming. And we'll talk about what that means. Basically, in order to be a functional-esque or a truly functional language, you need a very important paradigm, and that is called functions as a first-class citizen. And I will tell you right now that probably, if you switch to like a modern version of Java, like past Java 8, really past like Java 11, right? And like Java 14, and hopefully when 17 comes out, we'll start getting some really cool stuff. But past Java 8, we start getting into Java's functional territory. Basically, functions as a first-class citizen means that the language supports passing functions as arguments to other functions, right? Returning them as values from other functions, and assigning them to variables. So what does this mean? This means that I can take our little simple app, and we're going to talk about some quick functional programming right here. I can say constant variable learn React is equal to this function, and then I declare this function with what we call the fat arrow. And the fat arrow is this equal sign with a little greater than sign on the end of it, and it makes a little arrow here. This is what we call the fat arrow. For reference, it's not judgmental of the arrow. This is the skinny arrow with the little dash. So, and they both have different uses depending on the language or whatever it is. So this does, for your guys' knowledge now, this does effectively exactly the same thing that we just had, right? Same if I turned this into, so I could say const app equals function arguments, fat arrow, function body. All right. And this can go as far as you want it to, and we'll talk about that in a minute too. So we're going to get into doing some fun things here. So I'm going to get rid of our Learn React component. If you guys want to keep it here, you can just comment it out or just leave it as is. It won't disrupt anything we do. I'm just going to yeet it for the purposes of keeping my file small so all of you guys can see it. Is the fat arrow like a nameless function or a lambda? Yes, it is. So for those of you that are familiar with those concepts, yes, the fat arrow is essentially a nameless function or a lambda, and we'll get into lambdas in a minute. I'm actually about to talk to you about them when we get into some of this JSX, because we're going to use them to do some really cool things. All right. So there's one last concept that we haven't talked about in React, and I needed to introduce functional programming to get this. Yes, yeet is an official part of the professional computer science terminology. But we need to introduce functional programming to get to the most important part of React today in new React, right? Which is what we call hooks. And React hooks are essentially functions that we can use to perform functional style and functional like programming tasks for state management or event handling or other kinds of tasks like that. And they've got a whole bunch of what we call default hooks, which is hooks that come with React, and you can write your own hooks. And there's a whole bunch of other things. Today, we'll talk about what we call the useState hook, and the useState hook we'll use to manage state within our application. And we'll talk a little bit about that. All right. So for now, we're not going to create any more components. We're going to do everything inside of app just to keep it simple and keep it easy on you guys. And we'll do everything inside of here. So we're going to need to start at the top of the file, and we're missing two kind of important imports for dealing with React. And that's because everything we've done so far, React is able to quickly interpret and say, yeah, I know what this is. It's fine. Right? Everything from here on out, we're going to get a little more complicated. We're just going to not like go one notch up, and React is going to be like, all right, you need to start like showing me what's what. And so to do that, we're going to import some things. So believe it or not, React has its own import. So we can import React, and we need that now that we're doing some more cool, interesting stuff. So we're going to import React. We're also going to import what we call the useState hook. So we're going to say useState. And these all come from React. So it comes from the React library. And you can see that we're already using some React stuff. But as we get closer and closer to doing more advanced stuff, it's going to start wanting us to really get that imported. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clear out everything in this header tag. I'm just going to wipe it out, because we don't need it anymore. Not very useful. And when I save, if everything looks right, you should have this really ugly white page. So really ugly white page means success. We did it. So, all right, let's talk about the useState hook a little bit. Or actually, you know what? Let's make a simple to-do list, and then we'll talk about the useState hook. So in HTML, and mirrored by JSX, because JSX mirrors all the HTML vanilla tags, we have what we call an unordered list. And inside this unordered list, we can put a list item, which is designated by LI. And this is the tag for a list item. And then we can just type something in here, like take out the trash. All right, yay. So we're going to take out the trash. So now on our website here, we have one bullet point that says take out the trash, right? And if we were a really lazy HTML programmer, right, we could duplicate these lines, and we could make other tasks like mow the lawn right? And I don't know, feed the cat. All right, great. So we've got our simple to-do list. So we've got take out the trash, mow the lawn, feed the cat, right? So here's a simple to-do list. Well, this isn't very dynamic and I can't type more things in. So this doesn't really help me as far as the to-do list goes, unless I have to do these things literally all the time. So as far as this goes, maybe we want to be able to enter some stuff in, right? So in order to enter stuff in, right, maybe we could start generating all these LIs from like an array or something like that, right? So we can make a really simple array. So we'll call this to-do items, right? And it can be an array. And we can make it say, take out the trash, mow the lawn, and feed the cat, right? Ta-da! So we have our simple array. And if I were to just like throw it in here like we did earlier with that text, right, what you're going to see is that it prints the array all right. It prints it all as one sentence, all mashed together. This isn't very helpful. So you remember how I said we could write any code in here we wanted? So let's talk a little bit about what we can do to arrays. We have this really cool function called map. And map, essentially, you can think of it as a mathematical operation where you take each element in the array and you map it to something else, right? And so here's our first use of those lambdas with that fat arrow function. So we can take essentially a to-do item, right? And we can put a little fat arrow here, and we're going to map it to an LI of the to-do item, just like that. And now, when I refresh my page, you would see that there should be bullets on the screen. I'll kind of wait for people to catch up because I know that was fast for me and probably not as fast for you guys. But basically what we did here is we have this map function. There's a whole bunch of other cool functions like this, kind of just introducing you to one. This map function takes every item in the array and maps it to a new value. And essentially it spits back out a new array at the end. And that new array contains all of the new items that we mapped to. So to-do item or to-do items out here, because we're saying we're going to perform the map operation on to-do items. And then inside here, we've created a function, right, which uses that fat arrow. And we're going to say for each to-do item, right, map it to, right, this thing over here. And so now if you did it, we get this. The same result that we had earlier, just now using an array instead. All right. So we've got our little list from our array. How do we add things to the array? Well, let's start with some basic form input here, right? So maybe I can create like a little input, and it would help if I could spell input. And we'll make, whoops, no, I don't want to do the onClick function yet. It wants to get ahead of itself. All right, so its type is going to be text, and its value, well, we can erase that for now. I'm already getting ahead of myself. All right, so great. Its type is text. I've made this look really whack because in a minute it's going to be bigger. All right, and then we're going to have a button, right? And this button, let's say we'll make it do add item. So we've got this really basic, like tiny little form below our list. And if we speed on over to our page now, we've got this horribly white looking input. And we can type stuff in and we can whack the add item button, and amazingly, nothing happens. So right now we don't have anything, but we've got all the things we need to have something. All right. So let's move on to how do we go from this to being able to type in this input, click the button, and have something to get into this list. All right. So all of this has to do with that hook thing that I showed you earlier and some more of those Lambda things that we've been talking about. So first, let's talk about our hooks. And we'll start off basic here. All right, so we're just going to declare some stuff, and then we'll talk about what it does in a minute. So I'm going to make a constant variable. We're going to call this to-do value. And then we're going to put a comma, make a new item in this seemingly looking array called set to-do value. And then we're going to say equals useState, right? And we're going to put little quotes inside there. All right. What the heck does this line of code do? Because it's probably about the weirdest thing you've ever seen if you're not used to React hooks. Okay. It's a constant variable. It declares two things in an array format. The first item in the array is to-do value, and the second item is set to-do value. Okay. These are the names of the variables that we're referencing inside of an array. Because in JavaScript, we can just do that because that's fun. So we can say, in this array, I want to name the items or name the slots inside the array. So you're used to probably saying like array at 0, array at 1. Well, now you could say like array at cat and array at dog, right? Without cat and dog having to exist, because when you declare it, you can just name them straight off. So I can say, hey, const to do value, set to do value. Okay, and these are the names of the variable. Same thing as you're used to. Constant variable, names of variable, and then equals, and this is what the variable is assigned to. And it's assigned to useState, and then that's useState gives you back an empty string. Well, useState, all useState does is it declares and assigns us back, or gives us back essentially a value of something that we specify, so this empty string, and it puts it right there. And then it also gives us a function to change that value. And the key point here is this is outside of our control. So we've essentially given up control of these variables to React. And we've said, hey, React, we want to use your state management to take care of the to-do value and the set to-do value. And I'll tell you why. Because every time we come through and this component gets what we call rendered, right? Every time React comes through and essentially puts our component onto the screen, anytime someone refreshes the page or whatever, it's going to wipe all of our variables in here, and they're going to get set back as if this is a program executing from top to bottom. And so because of that, now when this re-renders or re-executes, I need a way to get something inside of a data structure that's somewhere else, that somebody's keeping consistent for me. So like that would be like saying, you know, if I open the fridge and the default state is an empty Tupperware up at the top, and I say, you know what, I made some spaghetti for dinner. I'm going to pull out the Tupperware, put the spaghetti in the Tupperware, put it back in the fridge, and I close the fridge. If we're not using useState, when I open the fridge again, there's just going to be an empty Tupperware there. I'm going to have to re-pull back out the Tupperware, put the spaghetti in the Tupperware, put it back in the fridge, right? But if I'm using useState, now that I put the spaghetti in the Tupperware, when I open the fridge, the spaghetti will be there. So now we've got spaghetti in our Tupperware, right? All right. Weird analogy. But all right, cool. So we've got useState. So let's actually hook this up to our input and our button, and I'll show you how this works. So with any input, we can set the value of the input, right? Well, what happens if we just set that value to do value? That seems pretty useful, right? And every time this changes, so on change, right, what we're going to want to do is take that change event, which we're just going to call E, or we can call it event to make it a little more clear. And we're going to transform that event into something. So there's that lambda again. Every time you see that lambda, you can think of it like a function, but it doesn't have a name. And you know, it's just getting executed with what it's got right there on the spot. So this is just going to set to do value. And so we're calling this function up here that we've got that manages this little piece of state that we've been given, right? And we're going to set that to do value to event.target.value. All right, what does that mean? So event is the event that happened when we changed this input. The target of that event is this input. The value of this input is our to-do value. So we're essentially, every time we change it, we're going to set the to-do value to the new value, and then the value of the input will become the new value. So it seems a little bit backwards, but you'll be able to see it work here in a second. All right, now, every time we click the button, so let's do an on click here. So every time we click the button, right, what do we want to happen? So with these lambdas, fun fact, you can put little mustaches here, and you can make a full function body if you need it to have like multiple lines. So all these are just one line, but if you put little mustaches, we can have multiple lines in these. So with this function body here, you know what I've decided that we're going to do? We're just going to do a console.log, and we're going to print out our to-do value, what it currently is. And we'll start with that. So right now, we've got our value set to our to-do value, and every time we change the input, the new value of the input, we're going to make it set to the to-do value. And then every time we click the button, we're just going to print what's in there. All right, cool. So you'll notice that every time I save, the page re-renders, and like I talked about that whole like open the fridge and there's a blank Tupperware again, because we weren't using state for the input the first time. You notice how when I went back over here from when we were typing stuff earlier, it's all gone. So that's part of that effect. So now we're going to start getting warnings and blah, blah, blah. We can just ignore these for now. We can talk about what those mean in React Advanced Part 2.0 or something like that. But basically, we can put in here, let's see, what's another thing that people do? Get the mail. So we can add item. Right, it won't add to the list yet, but you can see in the console over here, I've printed get the mail. And now we can do get the mail too, because my console is smart and it just says I printed it twice. So there we go, get the mail too. Hey, all right. So now we've got something where we can type in and print it, which means if we can print it, we can save it, right? The only problem with that is if I save it to do items, remember that whole thing about the Tupperware again? You open the fridge, Tupperware is empty if you're not using useState. So if we add it to to-do items, just to prove it to you guys, if we do to-do items dot push, which is how you add something to an array, to-do value, right? Now, if we refresh, we type something in and we hit add item, nothing happens because to-do value is being recycled every time the page re-renders. That whole empty Tupperware thing. So what do we have to do? We have to take these to-do items and make it use useState. Well, that should be easy enough, right? All we've got to do is do the same thing over again. And we can do const to-do items. And we can even use set to-do items if we want, although we won't use that, because arrays have their own functions that we can use on the array itself. But we can say useState, and for brevity, I'm just going to copy this and throw it in there like that. And now we can simply just yeet this little piece of code right there. Don't need that anymore. And now this to-do items.push to add something to the back of the array. So you'll notice it renders exactly the same thing that we've been rendering this whole time. Except now when I type in knit a sweater and we add the item,
You did promise us non-functioning code.
I did. I truly did, in the truest of sense. It's set to do value to empty. That's not going to do anything, but make it easier. To do items, there it is. Push to do value, which comes from there. We've proved that we know what it is. Went through this whole exercise. What? All right. Let's just start with an empty array just to make sure that it's not that I'm putting things in the array to start out with. Live code is the best, isn't it? Okay, I don't know what's going on. Great. Mow the lawn. Don't change anything about your program except put items in the array. Feed the cat. There we go. So now we can add things to the to-do list. And because we're using useState, every time we open the fridge, every last change we made to the Tupperware is reflected on our application. Just to prove it to myself, this should work. Because what this is the initial state of the use state. So if I put lawn as the initial state, mow the lawn. Okay, I don't know. My code was probably just having like an internal panic attack. So, and then this nice little nicety right here, set to do value to empty string. That's to get rid of your input when you hit add item. If we get rid of this, the only change should be that when we add a new item, that's what causes it? What? How? Okay, more experimentation required. Oh no, it just took forever to, okay. Weird things are starting to happen. I guess my computer is slowing down for some reason. All right, cool. So if we clear it, nice things happen. If we don't clear it, bad things happen. And I guess it's just really slow for some reason, which is interesting. So I'll clear the value to make it nice for the user. So now if you're the user of this application, and let's say we wanted to start with an empty list, and we need to mow the lawn, we can type mow the lawn, hit add item, and we have a to-do list item. All right. That about wraps it up. I don't know about you guys, but I always Control S my web pages because I obsessively save everything. All right, that about wraps it up for our React basics.